And take two here on episode 130 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. A lot of things have gone crazy here in the sports world. No pro sports, no international sports, no wrestling, but we still got shows here. We still got things we're going to talk about. Matt Dernlan, in your lifetime, have you ever experienced something so surreal when it comes to not just wrestling, but the sports world in general?
In general, the only two things I've been able to reflect on this the last couple of days. The only two things that mirror this situation similar, not in its entirety, but disrupting our lives, number one, and disrupting athletic competition. The one, I go all the way back to 1980 in the Olympics. Now, did that affect our daily life? No, not really. I mean, that was more of a political statement of what was going on at the time during the Cold War. But that disrupted, obviously, that was from a sporting standpoint and a wrestling standpoint, how it affected the wrestling world and its participants, not just in wrestling, but all Olympic athletes. That was one. And then obviously, 9/11 disrupted our lives in a number of different ways. But as far as those are the only two global events that I can really think back in my lifetime that really disrupted, the sporting community. And this obviously is having a lot more fallout, a lot more, domestic, international fallout and impact. But yeah, as far as sports specific, those are the two things. But although 9/11, it was disrupted for a time, but we kind of knew after 9/11 at a certain point, we needed sports back in our life. Right. And I think that'll come at a certain point in time as well, where we need diversions outside of Netflix and, your streaming services, something that you can identify with as communities, as states, as regions, as countries. Those sports unifies us in such a unique way. And at a certain point, when the time is right, we will need that as a society, right?
Yeah, and you brought up two of the things that, and I want to make the listeners know we're not taking a global viewpoint on this. We're taking a wrestling specific viewpoint with branching out in sports, because that's what this show is. That's what we do. So don't take it the wrong way that we're not talking about certain things that are going on in the world that are impactful with this. We're keying on the wrestling and the sports side of it. But there are three things that came up when I had this discussion at the Division III shortly after we canceled in Cedar Rapids. And one was I made the comment, I can't remember to who it was. I was like, can you remember anything in sports that's done something like this? And of course, World War II, we all know, shut down everything for years. Just historically speaking, that's why we had like 5 freshman champs in 1947 when they brought college wrestling back. But when we look at things that had an impact on the sport of wrestling, and you probably got to go back, or sports in general, probably have to go back to 72 and what happened in Munich with the tragedy and that happened there, the terrorist attack there. Then the 80 boycott in terms of how it impacted a lot of the westernized nations. Then, of course, you brought up 9/11. Now, this is one that was like to be impacted in a manner that impacts your livelihood. This is the first time it's actually impacted me in that way, because just for what happened from a timeline perspective, at the time I left on Thursday morning, we knew that the NCAA had said no fans. So I was actually getting questions from the media, being the president of the Media Association. Was media going to be allowed at Cedar Rapids? Was media going to be allowed at Sioux Falls for Division IIs? Was media going to be allowed at the NAI Women's Tournament in Jamestown, North Dakota? So those answers, I just had one answer to, and that was if you were credentialed media at Division III. At least I'd heard from Dick Simmons, the tournament director there at formerly of Cornell College, and now he's been the tournament director in Cedar Rapids for a while. We get down there and we have a 4:00 meeting. Well, that was the time I was getting down there. I got down there around 1:30, going to the venue. We're just talking about what ifs, and JP Williams is the Division III director of championships. If you're familiar with the name Anthony Holman, he's what Anthony is to Division III. So it's there's some members of the wrestling committee up there, and we're just talking. We're just kind of getting the lay of the land. I'm looking at sight lines. I'm getting the co-announcer John Peterson, who was originally out of St. Cloud State, to work together with him for the first time. And then at around 10 after 3:15, JP Williams is sitting next to me, and he gets up. He's on his phone, and he gets up and walks off the table. And at that moment, I'm like, But a couple minutes later, one of the wrestling coaches has his phone and goes, "It's on Twitter. We're canceled." And about 2 seconds after that, Scott Honecker is the head coach at Williams College up in New England, comes up and says, JP is going to email you something. You read it word for word. Then you can distribute to the media however you wish. Basic meaning, I can put it out on my outlets. But so I get this email, I open it up, and I read the statement. And it was probably the hardest 45 seconds of my career to sit there and read this. But it wasn't the reading that was the hard. It was as soon as I turned the mic off and I looked across the mat, there were 6 mats set up, and there's a kid that drops to his knees and just drops a giant F-bomb, drops to his knees and collapses crying. Several other kids in the mat next to me, just you can audibly hear them start crying and weeping as their career, in some cases their careers, because some of these guys are seniors, they're over. And there was this surrealness of like, did this just happen? Is this for real? This is happening. And then we're all looking on Twitter, we're all looking on our phones, and the reaction is nuts. It's absolute nuts. So when that happens, and I look over at this huddle of coaches, one kid was just holding his coach, just crying. And it was, man, I bring up there's 3 points. There's so much larger than this, but this is just, I don't want to make this about me because this is just what I was going through at the time. There are 3 occasions in my broadcasting and announcing career that I've lost my composure or very came close to losing my composure on the microphone. One was calling Jordan Burroughs' first world championship win. That was an emotion of happiness to see something, to call the match. I was working at USA Wrestling at the time, and that was like sheer elation and emotion, tears streaming down my face, just trying to keep my throat from quivering. The second was when Helen Marula ascended to the medal stand in Rio. And it did everything in my power to get those words out, because as soon as that mic button got cut off, tears streaming down my face. I mean, it's just like to know what that athlete goes through. And now we go to a completely different set of emotions and circumstances where I was fine for about 3 seconds until I heard those weeps. And then I got up. I went to the back table. I went behind the head table, found a tunnel, collapsed on a wall with my phone, just started crying my eyes out and texted my wife, says, I'm a mess. This is just, just to see it impacted me in a way that I really didn't think I knew that was possible. And that emotion is shared by parents. That emotion is shared by coaches. That emotion is shared by everybody that has a vested interest in the athletes that were competing specifically this weekend in the sport. Now, granted, yes, we can make the broader statement that impacts everybody in the sport, but to be on site, these kids were getting their last couple tenths off. They were ready to go. They were already there. And just some of them feel robbed. And it's, whose fault is it? But just the sheer emotion, it was one of those things where I looked around and there was very few dry eyes. I mean, a lot of people were less, outward showing of it, but you could tell that there was just this somber, surreal, like state of shock. And a lot of people were just kind of at a loss for words. And that was kind of the experience at Division IIIs. And I understand, Track Wrestling had a video with Jackie Paquette, who was University of Indianapolis. She's a senior women's administrator there. And that video was about 1 minute and 10 seconds long because she could barely get through it about how she felt for those athletes at Division II. And we're approaching this weekend. Here it is, St. Patrick's Day as we record this. We were supposed to be at the best wrestling party in the world this weekend. We were supposed to set records. We were supposed to do some great things. And now they're all what ifs. And those what ifs have gone to, let's pay attention and keep our family safe. Because Matt, while I may have thought initially this was maybe a little overreaching, but once dominoes started falling and I started researching a bit more, because I've been researching wrestling, man. I've been kind of in my own bubble. So to start looking at what's going on around the world and looking what people are doing to maintain and keep the spread. And, a lot of people might know this, but my oldest daughter is medically compromised. She's had over 30 surgeries. So at what point am I making, I travel a lot. I was in Wichita the week before. I was on a plane. I was in an airport. Like, how much of my travel is going to directly impact my oldest daughter, who has been hospitalized numerous times, and she's coming out of a lot of that stuff. But there's chronic pneumonia there at times. So those are things that, for me personally, really started to fathom the severity of or the impact this could have. It's not about who's all got it right now, but it's like the what if scenario. So that is, I guess, the long short version of how everything's impacted me in the last, less than a week here.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to digest this, and it's all impacting us. It's all affecting us in different ways and impacting us in different ways. And the fallout of this, we're all absorbing this right now and trying to digest and wrap our minds around it. And to your point, not only how it affects us personally, but professionally, and with our athletes' lives, and everything is impacted at this point. And I think the one thing that you know one of the things that you spoke to me is like your lifetime investment in this sport, covering this sport, giving back. You have a fundamental understanding of the sacrifices that these kids have made, and everyone around them, their parents, their coaches, the lifetime investment in the sport. That for most of these individuals and these athletes, this was the culminating moment. This was a culminating moment in their lives. And over the last several days, we've seen the impact and how it's affected student athletes around the country, around the globe. But what we've heard from that is a secondhand perspective. I guess what you delivered there and what you had to deliver to all the athletes out in Iowa was real world, lifetime, in the moment emotion. You delivered it. You were the one delivering the message that seasons and careers were over. Titles were lost, team titles, moments of history were about to be made. And it was there. It was tangible for all these athletes. It was tangible for these coaches, for these parents that have invested so much. It was there. It was in front of they were literally tasting and feeling the environment. The moment was at hand. And for you to have to deliver that, I can't imagine that, because you understood the gravity of the message that you were giving. And
I actually really don't know if I did at the moment, Matt, to be honest with you, because it was, again, everybody that was there, the trainers, the coaches and stuff. I mean, they're all taken in by it, but it was the gravity. And then like I said, the immediate response is the worst feeling I've had. Now there are feelings I've had when family members have passed on and things of that nature. There's some deep rooted personal emotional things that have ripped at me. I don't think, and I think some people share this emotion too. The training staff, the tournament director, everybody that was there that witnessed what happened in Sioux Falls and especially in Cedar Rapids where I was at, where those kids are non-athletic scholarship. They're there because they want to be. They're one of the most overlooked divisions in wrestling because they're non-scholarship and they're usually at these tiny little private schools and liberal arts colleges and things of that nature. But it ripped me to my core, and it ripped parents to their core. It ripped the athlete. It ripped their hearts out completely. But again, just as a spectator, I'm not anybody that, I mean, I've seen it, but not knowing that experience, if it's like somebody would take your favorite thing away from you and say, you can't do this anymore. This is the last time you can do it. And then you have no control over the situation, that feeling of helplessness. And then again, to know that these Division III seniors, for example, that's it. You're probably not going to be on the Olympic ladder. You've got probably a really good degree. You're probably smarter than a lot of us, like those kids at Hopkins or those kids at Williams. But like, it was really one of those things that just, it gutted you. It guts you. We can talk. I've had a couple days to rebound on it. And I can talk about it without getting the feels right now. But it was. I think that maybe is what the wrestling community feels as a whole. We've been gutted. 4 of our divisions lost their pinnacle championship. And that's a crazy thing to think about.
Well, especially for these D3 athletes. And we're going to talk about more about the fallout of this and how we move forward and restoring eligibility or restoring seasons or whatever it may be. We're going to get into that. But for most of these athletes at D3, they're not coming back. If they're in their senior year, these athletes are true student athletes. They chose D3 to be a student athlete. They made their college choice based upon their educational vocation first and their athletic interest second. And so most of these athletes going into D3, they know I have 4 years. At the end of 4 years, I'm moving on. The door is closed. I'm moving into my professional career. But so many of these athletes now, even if the NCAA chooses to restore eligibility and give them back a season of eligibility, most of these athletes will not choose that option. Because it's not, one, for most of these athletes, it's not financially feasible because there's no scholarships here for these athletes. So there's no financial relief or financial incentive for them to come back. So it would have to truly be a passion. And I don't think many of these athletes would make that choice. Like, no, I came to choose and compete for 4 years and then I move on. And so there's not going to be any closure for these athletes.
Yeah, and we also look at the sticker price too, and it's not, we I guess we've kind of gotten used to the extra year in Division One. Well, oh yeah, you can just go to grad school because the vast majority of our Division One institutions are universities with graduate programs. You're gonna find, there's one of those things where the difference between a college and a university. One of them is the offer of postgraduate degrees, for example. So when you've got these, they don't have the option to even stay in the same school anymore. Whereas if you want to pay the 60 plus thousand at a private elite academic institution to compete for 3 more days, you just need the second semester, because one unique thing about Division II and Division III is you can just pop right in that second semester. It's a semester count and things of that nature. The annual eligibility requirements are a little different than Division I, but you're gonna have to spend how much money? And student loans are one of these concerns that we have for this generation of kids right now. And it's like, okay, how much more debt because you didn't get your 2 days in Division II and Division III and your 3 days in Division I, or you have to uproot it. I mean, people were talking about what's the transfer portal going to look like if these kids do get another year, depending on what the NCAA decides for winter sports, because and not every winter sport had reached our conclusion. We were for the NCAA standpoint, we were at 3 final conclusions. You'd already gone through your qualifiers, whereas like we're looking at the round ball tournaments, the ACC and the Big Ten and such that had canceled. Well, that was their tournament automatic bid qualifier. Granted, a lot of those teams would have been at-large bids because they're power conferences, but your 14th place team in the Big Ten, they still legitimately had a shot, if that's how their format works, because I'm ignorant on Big Ten basketball, but if they still had a shot to qualify for the tournament, whereas we were done. We had our 330, we had our 180, we had our 240. We were set at those 3 NCAA divisions, and then of course the second year of the NAIA women, and they announced they were done too. So what do these students do if they do we're not even touching on the possibilities about the extra year yet, but say if we're jumping ahead and say if they do, this creates so many issues for those that can come back. Do they want to spend the money on coming back? And then do they even have a place to go? Does their institution, like at Division I, for example, let's use Franklin and Marshall, even though they didn't qualify anybody, they don't have a graduate program. So you don't sit there and have the extra year at F&M. You just don't have it. So it is, it's that part of the eligibility side of it that's the slippery slope of what happens now. I mean, do we have 5-time qualifiers? Do we have what happens to the stats of these? What happens to the David McFaddens, the Matthew Kolodzics that were going to be their school's first 4-time All-Americans, the Service Academy and the Ivy League wrestlers that can't come back for the extra year because they have other requirements that they signed up for when they went to those schools. So there are so many different packages to unwrap here, and it's like a bizarro Christmas, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie and I jumped into this a little bit yesterday, but when you're unpacking these things, I mean, it's so much more complex. Like, I think for the common fan, they would just say, hey, they look at this as a right or wrong scenario. These athletes were denied their postseason, so therefore their season should be restored and another year of eligibility should be given. But when you're breaking this down and you're looking at it from the perspective of the NCAA and that governing body and all the other D1 athletic departments, the conferences, how they view it, because how the Big Ten and their view on this is going to be different than, say, the EIWA or the MAC. I mean, their priorities and their, what they're looking at and how they're valuing things are going to be different than, a non-Power 5, a non-BCS conference, correct? And when you're specifically breaking down these things, number one, you're looking at 9.9. Typically, the graduating seniors, those monies come off the books and are allocated and directed towards your incoming freshman class. So your 9.9 is already compromised because you've already signed incoming student athletes to national letters of intent that you have to honor. So will there be an exemption, in a 1-year exemption to the 9.9, that you can carry extra scholarships based on, your senior athletes that were granted a year, if that's a possibility? So would there be an exemption to 9.9? The other thing is, there's the reality of a lot of these programs have roster caps. So they're sitting at, and most of them have maxed out their roster caps. And during their recruiting cycle this year, they've replaced that. And they've probably either met or exceeded their roster cap already, which most programs with a roster cap carry above that amount. So they already know they have to shed some extra weight to meet that number. Now, if you're above that and carrying an extra sixth year class of your seniors, fifth or sixth year class, how do you look at that dynamic? Because that has Title IX implications, right? So it's not just, if we're doing it for this sport in wrestling, what are we doing for those other sports on the other side of the aisle? And how does that balance out from a Title IX perspective? You're also looking at budgets, right? And how does that factor in? So, I mean, it's not as simple as just granting an extra year. And the other thing, JB, and this is one thing that people probably won't like to consider, but the reality of this situation, you referenced men's and women's basketball. They had not technically entered into their postseason. For wrestling, we completed, for the majority of our athletes, their postseason was competed in. And the majority of our athletes, their seasons were over because they didn't qualify for the NCAA tournament. They did qualify for the postseason. They competed in the postseason, but now their year is over. So how do you draw that line of demarcation between the athletes that didn't qualify and technically their eligibility was exhausted? Could that carry on to, would they look at the NCAA tournament? It's like, okay, the final national championship was not competed, but you did compete in a postseason. So I'm just trying to, I mean, that's a long-winded thing. And I'm trying to remove emotion and just look at this tactically and strategically. Like, this is how the NCAA, this is how universities and administrators will look at this. It has to be a little bit more clinical. We're emotional. It's affecting people we know directly, friends we know.
And that's a problem. Being
right?
clinical, you have to take emotion out of this when this is an emotional thing, and that's going to create an emotional response. And one thing I do want to actually correct the statement I'd said. When I was in Lancaster from 2005, 2008, F&M didn't yet have graduate programs. Upon a quick search, it does appear they do have some graduate programs now. But so athletically, though, like we're looking at the Ivy League. The Ivy League doesn't allow graduate students to compete. So that is an example that goes with, I mean, my F&M example wasn't 100% accurate at the time. It was 10 years ago, but to the point about back to being the emotional thing is, yeah, so what happens now? And interesting, there's a lot of things that have been jumped out. It's like, why is the redshirt freshman's eligibility not as important as the senior eligibility, or vice versa? Or why isn't, the emotional aspect, there's the emotional logic, if that makes sense. Well, why shouldn't Spencer Lee get a chance to become a 4-time champ? He wasn't a senior and he wasn't a freshman. It was his junior year. He's going to win his 3rd title. Now, nothing's guaranteed, but that opportunity was taken away. And then we look at, you touched on the Kolodzic thing with Kolat, but that's a guy that came back in February that, the plan was to sit out and make that run for the Olympic trials and such. And just again, to the logic, where's the emotional logic come in? Because we're a breed of sport, that we are a nuanced sport. The fact of the matter is, this entire situation in terms of eligibility will be nuanced, but the NCAA's charge is now to apply a blanket type of ruling that is uniform, but it will impact each sport differently, as you were touching on, as far as the postseason. Now, the question is, how much of this, in terms of our mentality, is based on eligibility? March is all that matters, is what's been preached for years. Well, here's a prime example of March being the only thing that matters, because you're trying to get back. So I was looking at some of the data, because I'm still going to put together the preview guide. I'm just going to call it a yearbook in this case. 39 matches in some cases guys wrestled, looking at 30 something, 40 matches. And then you go to the tournament and you'll have 4. So is, 10% of your season one date and 10% of your season potentially, if you even wrestle 4 matches, is that the value you put on your entire season. So I don't think there's a right answer if you were to apply. I think you'd have to apply it individually to each sport. And like you were saying, the equitability of the matter is if basketball said, well, wrestling got this, that's not going to fly. Wrestling's going to be, well, let's see, swimming and diving got this. Sorry, I was trying to think of another winter sport. What's indoor track going to get? So that's where we're at. It's for the lack of a better term, the devil's in the details, and we don't even know what the outline is yet, other than spring sports has gotten the okay for the extra year from the NCAA.
Yeah, because technically, when you look at an athlete that applies for a medical redshirt year, there are qualifying standards that if you exceed a certain threshold as far as competitions, they designate that as basically you've tipped the scales and officially competed. You've used enough of your competition dates that warrant and denote a year of eligibility is being used. And to your point, if they break it down, if they use a similar rationale between medical red shirts and a year of competition, it looks like there's not a clear way outside of they were not afforded the opportunity to compete at a national tournament. Outside of that, I don't know. And so I think that's what it comes down to. How much weight does a national championship carry? That's probably what it's going to come down to.
Us, it's everything,
right?
It's everything. I think I can't remember who I was listening to one of the interviews that I think it might have been Grant Leith or might have been Seth Gross. One of the, Flo's done a really good job of getting athletes' takes on this the last couple of days. And, nobody asked you how you did in Vegas. I think it might have been Chaz Tucker. And it says, nobody asked, oh, how'd you do in that dual meet? They're like, how'd you do at nationals? So that is a really good point to bring up again, because it's like what the value of nationals is everything to us. I think that's why we're bummed we're not going to get to party with 40,000 of our greatest friends this year.
Right. I mean, it's the culminating moment. I mean, it's what you shoot for. We don't, and again, this may heighten the conversation about, I know for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been talking about the importance of dual meets. I tell you what, you ask any of those national qualifiers if they give a crap about a dual meet, any of these coaches give a crap about any of these dual meet results. They don't. Because
I will give you a couple of exceptions.
Well, yeah,
everybody that won national duels titles at Matt Mayhem in Louisville. The only division that didn't have a national champion crowned from a dual meet perspective was Division I.
Right.
St. Cloud State. Yeah, they're Division II dual meet champs.
So I guess that's the other side of it, right? It's like, hey,
I'm not trying to politicize national duels by any means, but I'm saying that there's only one division that didn't crown whether or not it's unofficial or recognized or not, there was a national duels, and Division I's the only one that doesn't have it. So, I mean, even the junior colleges, there were non-scholarship one place, scholarship the other. So, I mean, the NAIA women, the NCAA women, they had national dual championships. So there are unofficial national champs. I mean, the NJCAA and the NAIA got their men's tournament out the way, and the clubs did their own thing, and they're starting to catch a little heat for that too. But like, again, the only division that didn't have a dual meet champion this year was Division I.
Yeah, and I'm sure that'll be brought up if and when the convention is held this year. It's like, hey, at least, yeah, this was worst case scenario. Will this ever happen again? I hope not. But if this ever happens,
I caution the sport though about setting a precedent over I don't know. I to say once in a lifetime might even be understating it, depending on how many books and sci-fi you read, or how much of an affinity you have for the movie Outbreak. It's just, this is for those who are that side of the aisle. I mean, I'll kind of touch gently on the term, act of God, but a situation that you have no control over. Let's be careful on how we do our policy based on, again, what's basically showing us to be as a freak instance.
Now we do. Now, if we remember, and this is somewhat of a stretch, but we have had another incident back in 1998 when we had the weight cutting deaths by these athletes. The NCAA came in mid-year and made a mid-year adjustment. They added 7 pounds to each weight class, and which are now our existing weight classes. But
because it used to be, if that was my freshman year in college, and if I recall, it used to be 18-hour day before weigh-ins. It was similar to internationally.
Yeah, it was variable. I mean, it was day before, or dual meets 6 to 8 hours before, but you weighed in well in advance. But anyways, back in 1998, if people recall, we had 3 deaths in the sport. We implemented the NWCA came in and implemented their new OPC, their weight cutting policies, their weight ascent, and all that good stuff. But what happened, it did disrupt all the wrestlers' lives that year in 1998. They all had to essentially move up a weight class. 118 was now
I think Steve Garland was the only one who actually moved down, because I think he went from 126 to the old weight, and then it was basically 125. Yeah, because it was 118, 126.
So there was a lot of athletes that were disrupted, and their placement in the tournament was affected based upon the decision by the NCAA. So, and this was based upon a series of tragedies that, probably hit the wrestling community hardest. As big as any event that I can remember as an athlete, as a coach, that actively directly impacted the sport. That came on the heels of Dave Schultz's death in 1996. But that would be a similar thing but it didn't disrupt the season. You were still allowed to compete. We still had an NCAA tournament, but the reality of it, and I guess I speak to it more specifically because I had a brother that year that ended up placing at the NCAA tournament, but he was a true 118 pounder. Actually, he was the size, he would have been a 114 and a half in freestyle. He was the perfect size. So yeah, he was able to go up to 125 and place at the tournament that year, but his chances of winning it were affected because he was outside of his normal weight class. But that's the only other time that I can think that decisions were made during the season that directly affected, kids competing.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that people are probably the most taken back by this, regardless if you think this is political or overblown or media, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care about anybody's opinions on that, to be honest with you. I've got mine. You can have yours. Let's move forward in that regard. But it's the response, the word cancel versus the word postpone. It would have been, for a sport like wrestling, it's problematic to postpone. We're learning this with the Olympic trials because the initial Penn State block would have opened up campus the day of the Olympic trials, and USA Wrestling went and they postponed it. They also are going to postpone and move the last chance qualifier, which, God bless him. Kerry Regner at Millersville, man. He was pumping this thing up. He was basically gonna put Millersville back on the map. I know he'd called me a couple times about it, and it was one of those things like that was going to be a killer event. That was going to be a monster event. And now Kerry's going to lose. He was going to sell the place out, and that program is directly impacted. That's a Division II program that is going to be directly impacted by the cancellation of the Division I tournament. Because when else is he going to have those hammers on Millersville's campus trying to do something? So there's some impact there. But postponement versus cancellations, that ain't coming back. You postpone something means you're going to do it again later. Now, the trials have to be postponed. We still don't know what's going to happen with the IOC and then, the committee. I don't even know if I'm going to Japan in August yet. So, and neither do any of the athletes. And we don't even have the team picked. So, of course, nobody really knows who's going. So, again, the terminology is important. So words matter. So, the key is postponement. Okay, what's going to happen? Now, I think some of us would have said, well, why don't we just put it on hold for a couple of weeks? Seth Gross really going to keep that weight down, or who's making the hard cut? Seth's probably a bad example because he's going to go down to a lower weight at the Olympics. But who's going to keep their weight without knowing when they're actually going to be able to step on the scale? As an athlete, Matt, as a coach, that's got to be that would be one of the most unnerving things. It's almost like are you dealing with the closure of trying to have something canceled, or just sitting there getting your hopes up? Does it make it worse if it's a postponement then a cancellation versus just like, all right, just chop it and move on? It's kind of like, is it the best worst case scenario just canceling it when the worst case scenario was canceling it?
Yeah, I think in the first 48 hours beyond the announcement, I think the reality and the world perspective and the national perspective dramatically changed. I think there was a lot of unknowns. Our information, our uptake on the information that was being disseminated by the government and the federal agencies, what we were able to absorb and understand in that quick, short 48-hour window completely changed what our perspective would be. Because I think the hope for the NCAA tournament was, okay, what if we can just hold on for a couple of weeks and push this back? But then when the government agencies and the institutions started making decisions to cancel classes, not hold any online and push everything to online classes. Essentially, the conversations that I've had with other coaches, schools are shut down. There's no contact with athletes. There's no contact with personnel. You don't have access.
You're not allowed on campus.
You're not allowed.
You're not allowed in the weight room. You're not allowed in your office. You're not allowed anywhere.
So it just wasn't even the feasibility of doing this wasn't even a possibility. Like, these kids can't train. They can't go to class. Their routine's been completely disrupted. There was just no way, shape, or form that this was even a reasonable possibility. So the conclusion was, you have to cancel it. When all the dominoes start falling as they did, like, the inevitability was there. You were going to have to cancel the tournament. And this was the best, most conscientious decision, the only decision you could rightfully make in good conscience.
It doesn't mean we have to like it either.
No.
And one thing I also want to point out too is, at the time of this announcement, so Thursday, I went and looked at the Minnesota Department of Health website figures. Again, you can take your opinions on cases versus how many tests, blah, blah, blah. I'm just spitting out what's been reported by the Minnesota Department of Health. On Thursday, there were 4 cases in the state of Minnesota, 2 of which were in Hennepin County, which is the main. There's Hennepin, Ramsey, those are the main counties in this particular Twin Cities area. Today, as of now, there are 60. And that's less than a week. Now, granted, again, more people are getting tested, so hence we're going to have more reporting of it. But that is, in a third of the cases in Minnesota are in Hennepin County. So it's like, okay, there's I've joked about this before. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, I mean, we're dealing with something we don't know about. And we don't know its impact. And I've already stated that, I've got the medically compromised, child. I mean, I'm worried about infecting my kid if I've been around, you guys know me. I'm a social being. Granted, I'm going to be shaking a lot of hands and giving a lot of fist bumps, a lot of hugs anyway. Yeah. Do I bring that home? I mean, would I have invited people over to christen in this glorious speakeasy that I built? I don't know. Any other year, yeah. But now we're dealing with something we don't know. So that's the one thing. I think the unknowingness of it is really, I think, what gets people the most irate about it, because they're going to look for anything to try to justify not canceling it. And again, that's it. I don't think there's a problem with that. I just think the emotional logic. Sometimes it's based on your perspective. I mean, it's like, it's so hard to say that this is the right decision if you disagree with it. I just be aware that, you've got the right to your opinion. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be wrong or everybody's going to be right. The more we see this thing explode, the more I hate the fact to admit that this probably was the right decision.
Because, we hate it because this event.
We want to be wrestling. I want to be working this weekend, Matt. We all do. We all want to be losing money, going to the tournament, going to bars, telling stories, doing $50 takedown tournaments in the parking lot. We all want to be doing it. Well, some of us don't, but we all want to be part of this fraternity that we get to do once a year.
Because it's such a unifying event. This is where the wrestling community congregates. We come together, we celebrate, we embrace each other, and we also try and kill each other and compete. And we want to see whose program is the best. Bragging rights are out there. You look at Iowa, and I feel for those guys, because it's been a decade.
It would take an act of God to prevent the Hawkeyes from winning the national championships this year. Well, here we go. Jeez. I mean, there's certain things we can kind of. I mean, we're not joking because we're serious. We're just that's kind of one of those like, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to lessen the impact of what this means for a school, university, coaching salaries, bonuses, all this stuff. But I mean, there are just some weird things you look at and be like, wow, that's, in 20 years from now, when everybody figures, everybody has, when you can joke about this thing 20 years from now, people will be like, hey, remember that time? Well, it's nuts to think about.
And, you touched on it at the beginning, but the historic nature of this event this year, where it was truly being opened up and we were showing what we can do, the attraction to the sport, the butts that we can put in the seats, the viability of a big time event. And we got behind it. We showed what we can do as wrestlers, as a wrestling, community. We stepped up and showed the support. Like, give us this opportunity. You give us the opportunity. We show what we're going to show what we're going to do with it. And we darn near, we sold 40,000 seats. So yeah, I mean, it just takes the air out of your sails. And, because you can deal with loss. I mean, and I've talked with other coaches, over the last couple of days, like, you get over it. The reality is, the nature of that tournament as a coach, as an athlete, for the most part, it's pretty brutal. I mean, we celebrate the winners and the All-Americans, but that's only 80 out of the 330 plus athletes, right? So the majority of those athletes and those coaches, it's a gut-wrenching experience, but they would never choose not to compete or subject themselves to it.
Right. And one thing is, we celebrate those champions, with session 6 for Division 1 and the other two NCAA divisions at session 4. But one thing Brian Hazard and I have talked about, and Todd Hibbs, one of the old tournament announcers, said one of the best things about announcing this tournament was the senior send-off. And this is when you're in the All-American round. So session 5, those seniors wrestling for their placements 3rd through 8th. And when they come off, when you're a senior, win or lose, you get the senior send-off. So, for example, we get Nathan Kreiser when he was a senior placing for Campbell, placing 8th, the first All-American in school history, closing his career. The guy from Old Dominion. I remember Chris McCarty comes off the mat at Madison Square Garden, closing out his career as a 2-time All-American from Old Dominion. Those senior send-offs are some of the best moments in wrestling. Dylan Ness did it a couple years ago when he was hurt. He had injury default. He went out on the mat to basically, all right, I'm there. I'm 6th place. I'm not wrestling. But to give his fans one more chance to, like, hey, so those are some of the moments that really aren't talked about. That session 5 is super special for those seniors that do make it to the podium. I've tried to make a point to do that at the Division 3 championships based on timeliness and things of that nature. So, this sport means a lot to those who aren't going to do it again. So again, we focus on our champions, and this is circling back to that senior moment, but like not that type of senior moment, but like the seniors moment. Win or lose in session 5, they get that send off, and that's something that, and it's sometimes not just the seniors. When Evan Wick finished in 3rd place, that was Barry Davis's last match as a coach, and there was the organic thank you, Barry. Olympic silver medalist. Multiple-time national champion Iowa, or when Gary Taylor coaches his last match a couple years ago when Chad Walsh was in the medal round. So it's not just for the athletes too. We had an opportunity to give coaches sends off. We don't know who's retiring yet. We do know that there are 2 coaching jobs that need to be filled in Division 1 right now. So there are so many moments that we miss that we're just scratching the surface of the depth of the importance of our respective national championships. And at Division 3, here's the thing, like, we're kind of touching on the fact that Iowa, didn't have a chance to dethrone Penn State and win another title. Well, here's Loris, Coach TJ Miller, Jim Miller's son, trying to become the first non-Berg, whether it be Wartburg or Augsburg, to win a title since the mid-90s. We don't know what's going on there. The women in the NAIA, their second invitational, or we were going to have a dogfight in Division 2. I mean, granted, St. Cloud State did beat Pitt Johnstown pretty handily in a dual meet in November, but that was going to be a dogfight. And we have, Pat Pecora possibly going to win a national championship the same year that he set the NCAA wins record for coaching. So many things we lose this year, and so many things that are just beyond who's going to be a 4-time national champ or who's going to win the team title in Division 1. There are so many storylines that right now in my daily news feed, you're getting stories about kids losing their seasons and their reaction. You're not getting, Loris ends Berg's streak, or St. Cloud wins X title in a row, or you're not getting those stories. You're getting stories of sadness, which quite frankly sucks.
How about this one? And I know this one is near and dear to you, and Carrie and I touched on this yesterday. I don't want to bring it up today. How about Noah Gonzer and the other athletes from EMU, who's not just wrestling for themselves, they're wrestling to honor and carry on the tradition that was ripped out of their lives when they eliminated Eastern Michigan's wrestling program. Carrie spoke very eloquently of this. He's like, Noah Gonzer, he's like, that kid carried the EMU tradition to him. What he was doing this year, as much as he bought in and believed in Campbell, there was very much a chip on his shoulder to what he wanted to accomplish his senior year for Eastern Michigan. And now that's
I think
taken
there
away.
have been 5 of those guys.
I
I think there were 5.
Yeah.
I think it was, so we got Zach Carson at Ohio, Andrew McNally at Kent State, Cedarian Perry at Old Dominion. Let's see, there was Noah Gonzer at Campbell, and Tanner Smith at Chattanooga. So, screw that guy up in Ypsilanti for one thing. But now, I mean, and here's the thing, like, you can get mad at him. I mean, here's the thing. Where do you place the blame on this? Because this was coming. This wasn't Anthony Holman. This wasn't JP Williams. This wasn't Ryan Tressel. This wasn't the championship heads. And you know what? You can blame Mark Emmert, but what is the NCAA made up of? What is the NCAA? It is the university presidents. And they're the ones who are going to dictate the policy. So it's like any board. Now, granted, Emmert has said that this was his decision, but at the same point, he's got how many thousand schools to answer to? And, we know that there's the potential litigation that some professions were licking their chops at, waiting for the first kid to get sick on a school-sponsored trip, and then there's lawsuits. So I do think there was a bit of liability mitigation here with the cancellation. But to your point, man, I'm borrowing your term. You say to your point. to your point, Mr. Dern, the Eastern Michigan guys, that's the one thing that hurts. I mean, because most of them I think were seniors. I know Tanner Smith's an underclassman, but guys, some like Cedarian Perry, he had a chance to. I mean, didn't have the greatest season, but remember, he was under 500 when he placed there, so he's had 2 above 500 seasons at ODU, and he doesn't get a chance to close his season out. And it's just those Eastern guys, that's another group that you kind of feel for. Because they got their program terminated, and then let's kick in the chips when you get down. So I mean, it's just one there's clear blame, and 2, the second one you're just like, well, the one guy to blame probably isn't the one that's most responsible for it. So yeah, sucks for those guys.
And
I
again,
really feel bad for them too.
The officials, the NCAA, the government, they're not trying to do that. I mean, they're safeguarding. All these decisions are to safeguard, protect the athletes, the coaches, the institutions. At the end of it, I think none of us lacks the perspective of what's going on globally. Like we know it's just a painful thing to take away.
Unlike Eastern Michigan, this decision was not born out of ineptness.
Right. And that's just, and life is not a fair thing. It's a brutal thing. And
wrestling's a fickle bird. And now this is, I mean, well, our lessons of wrestling are being applied to the global world right now.
Yeah. And the realities of life are going to affect you at a certain point, but we like to I always like to compare the college experiences. Like it's a test run about what life will be, but you're removed from some of the realities of life and the severity and the harshness of life because you're going to school. You're learning how to educate yourself. You're learning how to take ownership, for your actions and accountability for everything you do. But there's still a buffer that protects you from the realities of life. And when that buffer is lifted and it directly affects you and you're exposed, these 18 to 22-year-old kids are exposed to the reality and the cruelness of life. Some of these athletes, they're not emotionally prepared to handle this. We're older, and it's still affecting us at a deep fundamental level. But for these 18 to 22-year-old athletes who are not fully formed yet, or who have not ever faced this, I mean, it's a tough thing, and it's going to be. There's going to be baggage and residual fallout and damage that follows with these athletes for who knows. I mean, it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and one thing that we were going to touch on too is the economic impact. And I know this is an area that not a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of wrestling fans in the state of Minnesota. It's a good wrestling state. I joke on my Guillotine podcast that this is the land of 10,000 wrestlers, because we do have more than 10,000 wrestlers here. It's not just a catchy tagline, but one of the things you point out is Governor Walz is about to shutter the bars and restaurants until for the foreseeable future. So there's the impact of not having 40,000 people come in And then there's there's people that go to the tournament that don't go to the tournament. There are people that go and just pretty much hang out with their friends, and they'll watch at bars and stuff. So the amount of people in the stadium isn't exactly how many people are at the event. So then you factor that economic impact. They aren't coming anymore. They were staffed. They were ready for this. Then you take the fact that now they're going to be closing. So then whatever money they weren't going to get, there's another kick in the chips. Well, you're not going to get any of that money. And then you go into the airport. The airport was preparing for that. There's signage everywhere. There is, bars and restaurants. And then let's look at the wrestling economy. Now, granted, we're a very small part of this equation, but every single wrestling faction is going to lose something out of this. I'm going to lose a significant portion of my income as an independent content creator and journalist. Flow Wrestling is going to do the same. They're going to lose things. USA Wrestling is going to lose money. Every single media outlet is going to lose something on this, whether it be traffic to their website that puts some money in those advertising. Everything about this event will impact the wrestling economy. And then there's also like the gig economy, the Uber drivers, the Lyft drivers, taxis, everything. I mean, things that I like to do, the tap room, the independent brewers and such. I mean, I have a show I'm about to release about the best beers that you could have had while you're here. I already released my food show, which it's like I put that out. Well, in case you ever come here again, here's where you go. And that's what we've going to have to do with this is I really feel bad for the CVB and like Anthony Holman, for example, who took a chance. They gave the bid to something that's never been done before. And this guy is also coordinating College World Series. There's an economic impact on Omaha for those 17 days, or is it 14 to 17 days the College World Series is out there in Omaha? We're worried about 3 days. There's 2 weeks that Omaha loses income with all the people that come through there. And, it's just, this is hurting a lot of people, and it's going to hurt. I mean, if you look at the market, you know how that works. A lot of young people don't. They're looking at their early 401ks. Maybe they're just getting out of their student loans and they're starting to save. And they're seeing, like, for example, half of their value. Depends on how much you have. I mean, I look at my money. It's like, oh, I've lost a little bit of my retirement, a lot bit of my retirement. If you invest in crypto, that's, so everything is impacted here. So, I mean, I said we weren't going to really touch on the things that weren't involving wrestling, but these things do involve wrestling. I mean, every restaurant you were going to go to this weekend was going to have wrestling people in it in the Twin Cities. That is impactful to, and the thing is, that's impactful to where I live. And it literally hits closer to home than anything in my life that's ever hit from a wrestling perspective.
And from a national and global perspective, there's regions and areas affected across the country right now. I mean, we've lost every national championship, all the basketball revenue, all the for all those tournaments at the different locations, and how reliant those communities bid on these championships for a reason, because it drives the economy and it makes such a significant economic impact that's why they bid that's why they spend so much to land these bids. And, I feel for all these business owners that they look like they were going to run it. They were heading into an economic boom.
The Mall of America.
And now it's a wasteland, and it's an economic wasteland. Like, they were probably hiring additional staff members and everybody was staffing up at their places, their local businesses, restaurants, everywhere. And now they're shutting them down. And wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And not to play the woe is me card here, because again, not about me, but look at Minnesota the last 3 years. This was the third big event in a row, Super Bowl 52, the Final Four, NCAA wrestling. What would have been really cool is to see what the economic impact of wrestling would have been compared to those two events, to really put us on the map with these CVBs and be like, wait a minute. So I'm curious what this is going to do again because a lot of the bid process was being, a lot of cities were looking about how Minneapolis was going to do this. So, Glendale, Arizona has been rumored to, outside of Phoenix where the Cardinals play, is rumored as being interested. Does this mean Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta was interested site? There's the big football stadium in Indianapolis. I can't remember which global conglomerate has naming rights for that one right now, but it's like looking at these giant facilities, not just to make that the norm, but say that's the once every 4 year thing. We're going to go to a dome, or we're going to go to a larger facility. Maybe it's one of those things where the whole arena didn't work, whole stadium didn't work. Let's now try it with this bid process to put it to the end zone. Where we go, maybe getting to 40-45 was a little too ambitious. We won't know these things until another opportunity comes that the NCAA goes, Let's try it again. And what's funny to almost play devil's advocate, and I'm not just saying that because I get, 2 relatively small checks from the NCAA annually for announcing their tournaments. But if people are sitting there going, well, the NCAA only cares about money. Well, they lost a crap ton of it by canceling all these championship events for 2 seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, the most money-making sports for the NCAA are men's college basketball, okay, winter, NCAA wrestling, winter, College World Series, spring, lacrosse, spring, and what was the other? What did I say? What was Frozen Four, winter? So 5 of their money-making events are gone.
Yes,
gone.
And of that's the thing. The Frozen Four, the Final Four, and the Men's Wrestling Championships are 3 of the top 5 revenue revenue generating championship tournaments. So
then they're in the winter season.
Yeah. And I think overall, aren't those?
Yeah, there's 5 or 6. I think we're up to 6. It used to be 4, and then lacrosse entered to 5. I'm not sure if there's a 6th championship that makes money. And no, football doesn't count because there is no technically NCAA Division I trophy awarded. There is. It's FC. It's the football championship subdivision, formerly 1AA. But that championship doesn't technically make money. We're talking about championships. So it is men's basketball. It is baseball with the College World Series. It's wrestling. It's lacrosse and the Frozen Four. Those were the 5. It may be up to 6, but they're definitely those 5 that make those championships make the NCAA money. Not the sports, but they're championships.
Yeah. So I do. I mean, I have some differences with the NCAA, and I have some differences of opinion with my approach and their approach. But for them to remove the biggest revenue generators on their calendar, I mean, that speaks to how they're operating and how they were looking at this, that they were actually, willing to pull the trigger and make this, financial decision. But, I guess the one silver lining with Minneapolis, I guess the template has been set. We know it'll sell. We know it'll sell. Now, I'm sure there's some minor adjustments that, even though the tournament didn't get executed, Anthony was looking at the format and the layout. We heard all these people about, sight lines and, the mats being spread out too far, and we reasonably be able to have the same fan experiences watching these events. But so I'm sure there's enough information where things could be shifted, right? But there's good information that they could take away when they do go and open this up to another bigger venue like this. But where are you going to put those at? Are they going on the bar?
If you're watching the video on YouTube, in my hand sit these 6 tickets I purchased for friends and family. So this is part of the point where people talk about, I have a credential, I shouldn't worry about the fan experience. I dropped a lot of money on these, and they're pretty good seats. They were for my allotment, and these aren't gifts. These I had to buy. And what's going to happen now is those of you who haven't been notified, I've already received an email from tickets@ncaa.com. So that refund has been initiated. But what am I going to do with these? I don't know. It's one of those things where I did keep my credential from Division IIIs because I'm a credential collector, and I've got my room key. And it's like, it's like, man, it'd be really cool to still have that, what if credential. But that is that's not even on the list of things to be worried about. But what do I do with these? I don't know. I mean, it's part of me is like, okay, yeah, here's the Minneapolis event that never went on with these 6 tickets that are sitting in my hand right now. I don't know. I mean, what do you do with something that never happened? Is this something you have a keepsake of, just remember what if, or is it something that you're so pissed off about that you don't want to look at it because what if? I mean, it's like, I have a chair from New York. It was the first national championships Division I announced. That's one I'm going to relish. And I'm never going to sell that one. It's like, nope. But then I've got, do I have anything for Minneapolis? This is pretty much it. And it's like, well, what's going to happen? I don't know what I do with these. I don't know what if I do with anything that has Minneapolis on it. I live in the Twin Cities. I love living here. We would have put on one hell of a show, folks. We would have put on a hell of a show. And now, like I said, like these tickets, they're meaningless, and hopefully we can learn from it in the future. And these aren't going to be what ifs, but right now, I don't know. They might go in the trash for all I know.
Hey, it is history, JB. It's bad.
I'm a history guy. I mean, I might keep one.
It's bad history, but it's history nonetheless. And we can't just we can't look back on the 1920 season and say it was a loss. There's so many amazing things, so many amazing individual.
1920. How old are you, Matt?
That I meant the 2020. Yeah. My bad.
See, we're laughing. That's a good thing. The healing process.
There was a lot of there was a lot of great memories that we can look back on. We can look at, what Iowa did this year. And I know, like,
they set an attendance record. They set the record for most attendance in NCAA wrestling history in terms of a season. Not just, it wasn't, an outdoor football stadium, that drove their attendance up. They drew more than 12,000. They averaged more than 12,000. They drew 5 figures every single home duel. Never been done before. So there are some wins. Maybe that's the topic we discuss later in the week or next issue is we go back and look at our top things from 2020 that were most memorable about this season, whether it be something like, I think Pat Pecora would be on that list and national duels champs and things of that nature. What TJ Miller was doing as Loris. We've touched on these topics, but that's, I guess now we begin retrospective looking until we know we're going to have wrestling again. And who knows when that's going to be, at least on the college mats.
Yeah. Well, we'll just, we're resilient people. I mean, that's what the sport teaches us. We don't train for something that's being promised, right? And I think that's what Carrie and I talked about yesterday. Each one of our athletes, anybody that's competed in this sport, we don't compete. We don't train with the guarantee of something that's promised. Nothing is promised in this sport. You have to earn it. Yeah, you earn it every day. And, most, it's talked about, every NCAA tournament, typically only 10 guys are truly satisfied that walk out of that building. And so, most guys, if given or afforded that opportunity, they would say, I would relish that pain right now by falling short of my goals. I would be willing to subject myself, but this is wrestling. This is a sport, that we've embraced this mentality. We'll move on. We'll get better. It's just really painful in the moment. And I can't, like you, JB, my heart's ripped out for a guy that like you, that's been part of these stories, been part of these lives, as a coach and an athlete. It just breaks my heart that these individuals and these family members and these institutions aren't afforded the opportunity to accomplish something that they promised they would do when they came together. When the coach and athlete sat down as seniors in high school, say, we're going to do this together. Come join this journey with me. We're going to do something special, to tear that last chapter out of the book, to have it never be replaced. I don't know what we do with that. All we can do is, tell each other we love each other. We care about each other. We empathize, and we truly feel, because we've given sweat and blood. And so we understand what these athletes and coaches are going through, and, whatever we can do, we're going to continue to, galvanize, come together, and we always get stronger as a community. And I'm sure we'll do that, at some point. Right.
And with that, we'll wrap up episode 130 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. A tough week in the sport of wrestling. So for Matt Dernlan, I'm Jason Bryant. Check us out at therudis.com.